All right. Again, hopefully everybody's enjoying their Labor Day weekend. Baseball game starts here in a little bit, so in the middle of creating these videos, I'm actually grilling. Just a quick question that I want to ask the viewers, no matter where you are in the world, how many of you have the tradition of making bratwursts? Okay, I'm not talking the longer sausages that are used in Germany. The actual bratwurst, well known by the Milwaukee Brewers baseball league here in the United States. Tailgating or the Packers games. I'm making brats right now, so just a little bit distracted as far as going back and making sure I don't actually make them too crispy. How many of you enjoy a brat here and there? I'm not talking hot dogs, folks. Beer brats. And what kind of beer do you use to actually boil your brats before you put them on the grill? Okay, just a little question. You can add it in the comments below. Now, to keep this video a little bit short, we're going on to one of the more simple aspects as far as lightening the drivetrain to go faster. Drive shafts come in multiple different materials. Each one of them can handle a certain amount of stress or abuse being put on them by the output of the engine, the multiplication of the transmission, the weight of the vehicle, the gear changes within a racing aspect, so on and so forth. Now, realize in drag racing, okay, especially with vehicles equipped, with a longer drive shaft, the material needs to be modified along with any performance upgrade that you make. A factory drive shaft can handle approximately 500 to 600 horsepower until you start really getting into a lot of traction and gear ratios. Even in a 400 to 450 horsepower combination, if you're getting traction with a pair of slicks and you have a car that weighs, say, 2,500 pounds or more, the ability to twist the drive shaft is increased. Okay, so the factory drive shafts are limited. In circle track racing, that is one of the number one components that breaks, because especially in stock classes or super stock classes, you actually have to run, according to the rules, you have to run a factory drive shaft. So if that's, I guess it's just a little amazing to me, if that's the number one component that fails, you'd think that they would increase the regulations on that. But anyway, you can also buy drive shafts that are balanced. They have a little bit thicker wall construction to them in the aftermarket that will still, suffice to the rules and regulations. Now, as we all know, a drive shaft is a hollow tube, whatever length is needed to fit into the chassis, and the yokes of both ends of the drive shaft are welded on. Now, the material of each end also has to match the material of the drive shaft. So you're not going to be welding aluminum to a steel drive shaft. They have to remain the same. But in sustained racing like circle track, you can utilize aluminum drive shafts with aluminum yokes, either on a drive shaft or part of the tail shaft, kind of the transmission, or the yoke driving the pinion gear in the rear axle. Can they necessarily be used in drag racing? No, I wouldn't recommend it at any performance level whatsoever. But for sustained racing, something where you're maybe using the top two gears of the final gear drive of the transmission, aluminum will suffice. There's also been the ability to combine aluminum yoke constructions with carbon fiber drive shafts or even Kevlar. Now, again, they're very light, they're very stout within the be able to, to absorb the abuse from racing conditions. Realize that carbon fiber, once it is formed, wrapped, and cured, it's a very hard material, but it's also brittle. So it can withstand the twisting motion of the drive shaft, and it's not going to twist the drive shaft. But if exposed to a hiccup or even a backfire or something slamming into it, carbon fiber has a higher tendency to crack, shatter, so on and so forth. So in drag racing, carbon fiber drive shafts are not recommended. Aluminum drive shafts, again, sustained racing, absolutely. On the street, depending on the abuse, the transmission, and your intended purpose, aluminum drive shafts may work. Okay, again, it's on the escalation of power that's actually being produced and the amount of weight that the vehicle is actually, putting stress on the drive shaft itself. From my experience, anything up to that 500 horsepower mark, with the right combination with a softer hit, I'll say that you are driving automatic transmission where the torque converter can absorb some of the impact or release of power, aluminum drive shafts will survive. But that same 400 to 500 horsepower engine with a manual transmission, if you're doing clutch drops at 3,000 or above, the aluminum drive shafts may not survive. Okay, so just be aware of that. You need to understand their applications, use, so on and so forth. Anything else I can add to that? Yes, almost in every single racing syndicate, whether it be drag racing, circle track racing, anything like that, they realize one of the most concentrated stress areas is within the yoke or within a certain section of the drive shaft closer to the rotating, or excuse me, not the outside rotating, closer to the junction between the U-joints. In almost every situation, a drive shaft loop is required. Okay, so again, I believe NHRA rule regulations that if you're faster than a 13.0, you have to have a drive shaft loop. That's especially in classes that are requiring a factory stock style drive shaft. Okay, so again, be aware of what's available out there, and even the size and construction of the U-joints themselves. Some of the factory U-joints use a very small needle bearing cap and a very thin U-joint to hold itself together. Aftermarket, they normally go to a larger needle bearing cap and a thicker casting within the actual U-joint itself, along with the reinforced couplers of each side of the U-joint. They will also use, instead of bolts, they will use, or excuse me, instead of nut and bolt designs, will actually have a more forged bolt through design for the connection point for the caps. So with a factory type design, you'll realize that the casting of the yoke itself is cast, but sometimes the retainer for the U-joint might just be a steel formed cap that is bolted on to retain it. Folks, once you get over 400 horsepower, just dump those. Just get rid of them completely. Now, before I go, in all of these videos, I want you to make sure that you know the difference between what is extremely high-end stuff, what is factory stuff, and you're going to find yourself typically somewhere in between. So if you are not familiar with Mark Williams Enterprises, okay, they're an axle and brake manufacturer. They are one of the best in the industry. So if you want to go ahead and click on and do a little bit of research, look at their components, look at the designs they go by. If you're looking for the absolute best drag racing axle out there, they have their GM 12 bolt design that is much heavier duty. Okay, bolt through design, heavier bearings, so on and so forth. You're looking at almost 30 grand just for a rear axle complete. Okay, so again, majority of you are not going to be spending that kind of money on a rear axle. But you can also get by with some of the axles you might find in the junkyard, depending on your entire combination. So again, you have to realize what is your goal and reverse engineer to get you to your goal. And even a little bit beyond, because if you find, if you're not satisfied with the performance and you do a few more modifications down the road, you want your drive line to be able to handle a bit more than your actual goal. With that, have a good one.